So I want to welcome you to this series of videos. So my name is Mahabodhi and I'm a Buddhist teacher in the Triratna Buddhist order. And the idea behind these videos is to get some more in-depth discussion going on topics of interest. I was very inspired by a TV program in the UK that aired in the 1980s and 90s called After Dark. And in that program, you had a group of people who would talk about a topic open-endedly for several hours, starting at midnight. And discussions just went really deep. And the program was seen as one of the best bits of television ever. So these days, we have a bit more of a focus on long-form conversations on things like YouTube. So in honour of After Dark, I'm going to call it A Dark 2021. So today's session is a interview with Melanie Ryan. So Melanie is a psychotherapist and an author, and her book is called The Golden Shadow Method. In that book, she goes into, in a very kind of practical way, how our shadow, which was a concept invented by Carl Jung, that everything has its shadow side. So Melanie goes into three basic things: Jung and the shadow, the Buddha and the shadow, and Shamans and the shadow. So yeah, really interesting. And so we've just got a half-hour interview.
It was postponed to this August, but I canceled it a few months ago.
Right.
I've led retreats. I just started actually a travel educational company called Ancient Wisdom Today to take people to various places around the world. And we'd gone to Greece in 2019 and
Wow.
had lots of plans.
Yeah.
Got canceled.
Yeah. Well, it's really great to have you here. So, I'll just introduce you now. So this is Melanie Ryan, who's the author of The Golden Shadow Method. Well, do you want to tell us about your book, which came out this year, The Golden Shadow Method?
Yeah. So the Golden Shadow Method was really in the making for probably about 7 years, and it's a integration of three different perspectives of the shadow, which, of course, Carl Jung's concept of the shadow, he coined the term. But it's really a cross-cultural view and a spiritual view as well, from the Buddhist perspective as well as the perspective of indigenous shamans. And so it's been my path for a little over 15 years now. I'm trained as a psychotherapist, and I've been a psychotherapist for 25 years. But along my way, a few different things that were unplanned started to happen and awakened me to a deeper part of myself.
Yeah.
And I discovered yoga and Buddhism and began to really study very deeply the teachings of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who is a Tibetan Buddhist master who passed in the 80s. But his teachings and his lineage are still very strong today. And so he's a Tibetan Buddhist master and of the Nyingma and Kagyu lineages of Tibet. And he came to the United States in 1970 when he met one of my teachers, but the one that I've worked closely with, a senior Buddhist teacher in the Shambhala lineage of Chogyam Rinpoche, David Nichtern. So they met in 1970, which was actually the year I was born.
Yeah.
So that gives you an idea, right, of how old I am. But my awakening really started around the age of 30. And through yoga, I found Buddhism, and I found David Nichtern, and I found Shambhala and the teachings of Trungpa Rinpoche. At the same time, I met a Native American shamanic healer. And so really side by side, I started to do Buddhist meditation in that lineage of Shambhala and shamanic healing at the same time. So I was really deep into healing myself and had been chronically sick most of my life since about age 3, starting with like severe allergies. And then that just built into chronic sickness, leading all the way up to being diagnosed with COPD and asthma, various surgeries and things. And then through my healing path, through my discoveries, I really awakened a part of myself and some things that I say would be hidden in the golden shadow, which is our intuition and our ability to heal ourselves and the power of our body, our mind, and our spirit. And so in college, I had really just touched on the teachings of Carl Jung. But when I started to really tap into the shadow, I came back to him much later, just about 4 or 5 years ago. I started to feel his presence and started to really sort of connect with him more on like in a spiritual way, where I felt like when I was meditating, I was being guided to his books and things, and synchronicities were starting to happen that were all starting to point toward him and his work. And so I started to dive in more and started to engage in depth psychology for myself, right, to work on my own shadow. And so lots of things happened. I met a teacher by the name of Charlie Morley, who is a Buddhist in London, actually. And he came to Connecticut, actually, my son's homeschool. And he spoke on lucid dreaming. He's big, a lucid dreaming teacher. And he said the golden shadow. And it was the first time I had heard that term. And it struck me like lightning. So that was, I think, 2018. I think it was 2018 when I met him. And things just started happening, just ideas. And I just started getting flooded with all kinds of things. And basically it was, I needed to write this book. The pandemic hit. I had been very busy running a very large holistic health center here in the Hudson Valley of New York. And so I had felt the book coming through me for many years in different ways, but I just never had time for it. And so I was manifesting other things, like becoming the owner of a very large holistic health center, and then starting to lead retreats around the world. But the book was always like on my shoulder, like nagging at me. And then when the pandemic hit, we had to lock down. I had all this space. And so that was when the Golden Shadow method really came through. And I hired a book coach, and her program was to write a book in 90 days.
Wow. Yeah.
I ended up writing it in 6 months, and it all just came out very easily. A lot of it came from my meditations. I would meditate and then write almost every morning. And then it just came through. And it's really taking on a beautiful energy right now because of what we're seeing in the world, of this shadow effect going on. That's the name of a book by Debbie Ford, Marianne Williamson, and Deepak Chopra actually wrote a book called The Shadow Effect, which really is this explosion of, the darker side of humanity, everything that we have avoided and hidden, and the unexamined shadow. But at the same time, there is a golden shadow exploding as well, right? So the light always rises to meet the dark, right? Not to take a quote from Star Wars, but it did come from Star Wars. The light always rises to meet the dark. And so we have that duality in the universe. It's everywhere. Nature is full of creation and destruction, and it's just how things are made. So I really felt compelled, and through my own healing process, I was always pointed out to look at my golden shadow, not using those terms necessarily, but shamans teach us to reclaim lost power, right? Intuition, our ability to heal ourselves. Buddhas teach, the path of awakening, the path of liberation, to tap into our Buddha nature, right? So, and Jung, called it the path of individuation. So they're all really, saying the same thing. All of these different lineages cross over. And because I had the background that I had, and it's what I've been practicing for myself in my own life, and it's been what I've been teaching for the last 15 years, that it just made sense for me to write a book, developing a method to take people through a program we just finished Jung in the Shadow actually last week. And it was an online live workshop for, there were 6 live workshops and almost 90 days of immersion into Jung's work. And so working with archetypes, working with shadow projection, getting into creativity and things like that to really raise awareness. And the dark and the golden shadow, they dance. I say that, you can't look at one without looking at the other, really. So they're really like that yin and yang, they're really interconnected. So the program blew me away. It blew away the participants. It was far more amazing, and transformative than any of us expected. And that was the first time I taught Jung's work in that way. The Buddha and the Shadow start in June, and Shaman and the Shadow start in October. So it's really designed, and that came through my meditations as well when I asked, how should I teach this? It's been every other Saturday for 3 hours. So we meet from like 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And then they have exercises. I call it awakening exercises, not homework. Awakening exercises, because you choose how much you want to awaken, right? If you don't do the exercises, then, you get out of it what you put into it. And then we would meet every other week. And so having it spread out like that and having them actually experience the teachings live in their life and then come back, and we would regroup and have a process time, and then I would do a presentation and teach the next set of teachings, and then they would take that into the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So it really was amazing, and I'm really happy with how it all came together. And I think it's, the time to do this, to help people become aware of their hidden, and forgotten golden shadow.
Yeah. Well, one image that came up for me with golden shadow was in the there's a Buddhist scripture called the Sutra of Golden Light. Have you heard of that?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, it'd
be great if you could send that to me. I would love to see that.
Yeah, it's a book, actually. Yeah.
That's the title?
It's a Mahayana Buddhist sutra. And it's all about confession. So it's all about I think the story is something like there's this character who he kind of beats this drum. It's like a drum. So it's shamanic, so it beats
Sounds very
drum.
shamanic.
Yeah, and then out from the drum pours this golden light, and in a way, this guy called Rushriketu, he does this really, really in-depth confession, which is kind of just pouring out all of the I suppose that the things very deep down in his psyche that is, that's maybe you could maybe see that as a shadow, things that have kind of got in the way and
right, obstacles.
So
it sounds like a purification.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But yeah, you've got the darkness and the light as well. The golden light. Yeah. I really like that image, that sutta. Yeah.
I'm working on my next book, which really actually has to do with the transmutation aspect of the purpose. Everything is, I truly believe that everything is designed perfectly, right? That this mandala of being and the mandala of nature, that there's a purpose for the dark side, right? That Carl Jung's famous quote is, "We do not awaken without pain." So for myself, it was my own spiritual awakening. My journey was actually awakening through disease, right? Through illness. And those were my teachers. So there's dark wisdom, what's called dark wisdom, right? And even the Buddha, when we talk about, so what is the purpose of suffering? Right? So the purpose of suffering is to cultivate wisdom. right? We go to our elders because they've been through life, they have their experiences, they've been through the pain and the suffering of life. And
Mm.
so they have wisdom, right, to share with the grandchildren and the children. You know, some people don't like to listen to the wisdom.
Mm.
I've been one of them where people are trying to warn me, you know, you might want to do it differently. No, I'm going to do it my way. And then I learned by my quote unquote mistakes. Really, there are no mistakes. I needed to go through, we all need to go through our pain and our suffering in order to learn, right? Because isn't that why we're here? We're here to learn, we're here to evolve, we're here to
Mm.
discover who we really are. And so pain and suffering plays a role in that,
Mm.
right? Disease, illness, injury. The shamans would say that they would call that an initiation. When you
Mm.
become initiated as a shaman, it's often through illness, disease, injury, or near-death experiences.
Mm.
I wrote about that in my book.
Yeah.
So it's all serving a purpose for us, right? We're not
Yeah.
victims that where things are happening to us. Some of us get stuck in that victim role because it just depends on who you speak to, right? Where some people can really validate you being a victim, whereas other people will empower you and say, you know, you're not a victim. You actually chose that on a soul level, right? To help you awaken.
Yeah.
And so why do things repeat, right? Why do, you know, there's some ugly situations and painful situations that repeat, you know? So from a spiritual perspective, you know, it would be that you keep missing the lesson.
Yeah.
You're not getting the teaching, you're not getting it. And
Mm.
so I got more and more sick, you know, and it wasn't until I was really, really sick to the point almost where I couldn't work anymore that I
Yeah.
finally sought out a healer that taught me, you know, how powerful I was and started to look at my dark shadow and my golden shadow and all of that all at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's about liberation, right? It's about self-realization and liberation. And what I'm even being asked to do now with this book, you know, where it's taking me in my life, it's sometimes scary, you
Yeah.
know, to really put yourself out there and sort of be on stage and teach
Yeah.
and present. And
Yeah.
we all have to work on our fears and transmuting them so that we can be all that we can be. And we can be so much more, you know, than what we think and what we believe about ourselves. And that's what the golden shadow really teaches. It's how to awaken your full human potential.
Mm.
And we are so full of potential. We're so full
Yeah.
of greatness. We're so
Yeah.
full of power and divine light. We have so many abilities that really are just hidden and forgotten.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, the shadow in general is also not just what's hidden, but it's also what's been forgotten, disowned, buried, right?
Yeah.
So the method is, and the book is great because I offer a lot of exercises that people can do on their own. And I'm still in the process of, you know, making videos and, you know, sort of letting people, you know,
Yeah.
have it directly from me. I just started a YouTube channel, The Golden Shadow Method. Um, and, you know, really giving people an experience of these exercises. I give over 35 exercises in the book, you know, and so each part is one of those lineages, right? So part one is Jung in the shadow, part two, Buddha and the shadow, which we need a lot of grounding after working with Jung's teachings. You know, the group we just finished, they are stirred up.
Mm.
They're just like, oh my God, like so much has come to the surface. So much is in their awareness. Some of it's golden, some of it's dark.
Mm.
And they're saying, I feel like I just need to sit with this now. And I said, well, that's why Buddha in the Shadow is coming in June, right? So there's a month off in between the program so that people can really just have some space, right? We need
Mm.
space, not rush from one thing to the next, and digest all that the Jung in the shadow gives to
Mm.
them. And then we learned how to sit with it and the teachings of Trungpa Rinpoche. His teachings on basic goodness really is very golden shadow-like. Basic goodness is like step one in the Shambhala trainings is understand that you are basically good. That you have this inherent goodness, that you have an inherent wisdom that you're born with. This is the essence of who we are. We are basically good. And each situation, we can always restart and see that each situation can be fresh and find the basic goodness just in our day-to-day life. It's always there. So Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings are very, very much about awakening the shadow, but starting from that foundation of that we are basically good. And so, the Golden Shadow Method, because in my Buddhist training and also in my shamanic training, both of those healing paths really started off telling me that I was basically good, that I was powerful, that I had this inherent wisdom. And that is not what most people think of when they do shadow work. They're like, oh, I got to go and look at like the ugly part of me, right? I got to go in and I got to really, just be with, what I really am very uncomfortable, with looking at the pain and the suffering and the trauma and the wounds. And yes, that's a huge part of the Golden Shadow Method. We're not spiritually bypassing, right? We're not skipping over doing that really uncomfortable work. But we need to start from step one, understanding that there is both a dark shadow and a golden shadow. We can be fearful of both, because we can be just as fearful to look at our golden shadow, because to know that we're so powerful, right? And to own up to that, to become, all that you are capable of being can be scary too, right? But to at least present the shadow in a way that really takes the whole view of what's hidden, what's been forgotten, right? So much has been forgotten that is positive. So my approach is really to present that in what is a humanistic psychology kind of way, right? And bringing that forward when we do shadow work and learning how to make friends with all of it and learning how to overcome our fear of it, both.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I kind of, I can recognize the pattern there, I've had three in my life. I've had three major meltdowns where I've ended up on the floor.
All those breakthroughs.
Yeah, breakthroughs.
Down to break through, right?
Yeah, and it's always been something that I've been ignoring, So when and kind of like being a bit idealistic. So when I was helping convert a warehouse into the Manchester Buddhist Centre in 1995, and I just did 9 months of building work, and then I didn't know anybody. I'd just moved to Manchester, and then I wanted to do some art, but I was working full time, and it's just too many things. And I ended up flat on the floor with that so much anxiety. I couldn't, I just had to ground myself on the floor. And what I learned from that was that I actually needed real friendship. I was giving it token, I was, giving it lip service, and out of that came a really brilliant friendship with a fantastic psychologist friend. I said, "Would you help me psychologically?" He said, "No, I'll be your friend." And he has been since,
That's wonderful.
And then the last time was, I always thought I'd write a book, and I was working in a Buddhist cafe underneath the Buddhist Centre, and again, it was like it'd gone well, and then it wasn't going so well, and I was carrying on, and then I just ended up having another meltdown. So I had 3 months off, just licking my wounds, trying to be very gentle with myself, and out of that came I started to write a book, which had always been what I thought I would do with my life, but I'd never really taken it that seriously. So that was 17 years ago. So that was the last one. So maybe I'm due another one soon. So I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So crisis creates an opportunity,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Chaos. Trump Rinpoche actually looked at chaos as a positive thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? This is our time right now, globally, with all this chaos. It's a time of really looking at things and examining things. We're examining the shadow in a lot of ways. And those of us who are really aware of what the shadow is are really in tune to what's going on, very conscious of what's going on. And so we have an opportunity, right, to not necessarily go back to what people are hoping, to go back to normal, right, whatever that means, but to actually move forward and create and make things better, right, because there were a lot of things that were wrong before. And so is this chaos, is this disease, is this, like the shaman's view of, is this a global initiation, right? Because disease and death and near-death experiences and injuries are all seen as transformation, as opportunities for change. And so is this our time on a global scale, right? To look at how to create a better world for ourselves and for our children, to not take for granted the earth, and the elements, So there's a lot of that happening. And at the same time, all of that positive change, there's a lot of really awful suffering going on. So we see nature, right? We see the duality of nature on a grand scale right now, like we've never before in our time seen it. But this is our opportunity to make changes, right? So chaos is the anatomy of change. This is the great transformation. So we each want to ask ourselves, what are we going to do, going forward? And so the golden shadow method, I think, it nearly busted out of me. It was like it really wanted to be born right at that time, and it came out on Amazon in digital form, winter solstice of 2020. And then the paperback came out in January. So it really just wanted to be here. It was like I couldn't do anything else. So I believe in that, auspicious coincidence, we call it, right?
Yeah.
So now is our time to heal. Now is our time to transform. We transform the dark shadow into gold as well, right? That transmutation of energy. And so in my book, there's lots of examples on how to transmute. I start to just sort of hit the tip of the iceberg with that. My second book is going to be about going deeper into dark wisdom, into understanding and appreciating, being able to step back when something bad happens, right? When we have these meltdowns, to actually be able to sit back and understand, wow, this is really horrible. This is really uncomfortable. This is really painful. And this is here for me to help me get to where I really need to be, to make me see something about myself. Maybe make me, love myself more deeply and nurture myself and find the balance. What's missing in my life? Like you were talking about friendship, it's those dark nights of the soul, right? When we are completely breaking down and falling apart, that wisdom, that light shines. So the dark is actually seen as golden as well in the end. When we have the correct perspective of it, we see that it's actually ripe for wisdom. It is that breakdown and that breakthrough.
Well, we have to go through a process of softening, don't we, at some point? Softening our hard expectations and,
being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Learning not to be afraid of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And that breaking down is not a weakness.
Yeah, and thinking that we always have to know what's going on and that sort of thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the mystery, the not knowing, being in that space of uncertainty, right? And waiting for the sign of, what am I supposed to be doing next? And we have to have a spiritual connection, right? It doesn't have to be religious, but, some connection to a spirituality, something greater than ourselves, the meaning and the purpose of life, right? And to ask and to wait and to be patient, to be shown our way out of that mystery. Eventually, things start to fall into place. Pieces of the puzzle start to come together, and we then know what our next step is supposed to be. Sometimes we don't have to actively seek it. We don't have to try and problem solve, right? We can actually let go and surrender and wait. And so the Buddha and the shadow pillar really talks a lot about that. And the practice of shamatha meditation, which is really opening everything. It's an open eye meditation. It's really very much about being here, not going anywhere, not leaving, not avoiding, right? But actually really opening as opposed to like suppressing, right? So in shamatha, it's a meditation technique where we're really having a very direct experience of our mind. And so what happens organically is the shadow starts to come to the surface. So I use shamatha as, the way Carl Jung would use archetypes to communicate with the shadow. In Buddha and the Shadow, we use shamatha meditation as the vehicle to communicate with our shadow. Both dark and golden come up just as we're sitting.
Yeah.
And there's walking meditation in the practice as well, and some outside work in nature as part of it, walking outside, learning to open up all of our senses as well as our intuitive sense. And then shaman and the shadow, we really start getting into working with, Carl Jung would call them archetypes, right? But like spiritual guides, power animals and spiritual teachers, and really connecting to the earth and the wisdom of the earth and the whole natural world, that's greatly hidden, especially our culture here in America. A lot of the ancient wisdom, we don't have, when I went to Greece, and there's statues of Athena and statues of Socrates, like the ancient wisdom is everywhere. You can't forget it. But here in America, there's nothing to remind you of the ancient ones. There's no temples, there's no nothing. So it's really very much buried and forgotten here. But I hope that this was all that you expected.
Very much so. Thank you. Yeah, it's brilliant. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so let me know what you'd like to do next, and we'll see where this goes.
Great. All right. Great.